Rabbi Singer, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Early Zionist leaders were often openly anti-Torah. How do you understand the fact that their movement ended up building the foundation of the Jewish state? Does that contradict the Torah, or is that actually part of the prophecy?
I think I would be remiss if when we saw the second temple being built, and I want to say this to our dear viewers, Ezra and Nehemiah, as an example, could be very seductive in that it's intriguing historically. It's very gripping. Ezra and Nehemiah is very readable. But it's vital to understand when you read historical literature from Tanach, you could forget that this is holy. These are holy works, and they're intended for future generations, and especially for the generation of the Gula. I say it because Ezra Nehemiah you're being drawn by just terrible things that are happening, and then good things happening, and then things fall through, and it's that we had a great president, and then a bad president, and a good one, and you're just watching this whole drama unfold. Or you can read Megillus Esther, and it's a gripping story, but you could forget that actually this sacred literature is Nitnu L'Doros, is given for future generations, and specifically those Sfarim, Ezra and Nehemiah particularly, are always Moshiach. That's why the Talmud tells us that there was no Targum permitted on the Kesuvim. Strangely, Ezra Nehemiah is in the third segment of Tanach, that segment of Tanach, which is called the writings, right? You might wonder why, but it's very important that the writings is all Mashiach. And the Gemara talks about this famously in Megillah, that there was there was a Targum on it. Now, a Targum means a translation, an Aramaic translation, but that's not a proper explanation. The Targum, like of Unclus, or Yonasan ben Uziel, is not really a translation, but really it's a commentary. It's giving us insight. But the translations like Art Scroll or Judaica Press, those that we're familiar with, they're attempting to translate, and of course, you can translate Hebrew to English because it's not readable, and there are many words like the verb of being. The whole thing is just different, so it has to be rewritten, refashioned to make it readable, and they're trying to render what it said. They're attempting to translate, and they can rightfully call it a translation, because that's the attempt that Rabbi Moshe Rosenberg, who did a brilliant translation of Judaica Press, he attempted to translate. No, it's a commentary, but the attempt is a translation. But the Targum, this is very important, you should know this, it's called an Aramaic translation, and is a complete misnomer. They're not even attempting to translate, but rather it is what's called a dynamic commentary, which means it loosely is a translation for sure, but they're interlacing their translation with complete commentary. It's very, very important. Please, you, the viewer, must know that Targum Unclus, when we say that Targum Unclus is Misinai, it means that the ideas that are baked into that Targum, Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, who's a great Tana, who was a giant, just a giant, he's not really translating. He's rendering, but he's baking, deliberately putting a commentary in it. It's a system that is not in vogue today, but it was then. So therefore, we don't mean just someone didn't attempt to translate the Ketuvim into the Aramaic language. That would have meant nothing. And there are such things that did exist. The key point is that Ezra is a fascinating sefer book. We're not introduced to Ezra himself until the 7th chapter of the book of Ezra, strangely. But what's key is that there were very religious Jews among those who left Babylon to come to the land of Israel to rebuild the Holy Land, meaning to rebuild the Second Commonwealth, at the calling of Cyrus. Cyrus, an unusual figure. He's like a Zoroastrian, a Persian king who says the Jews go back. And what's very critical, so you do have very holy Jews, like you had in the 19th century, the Shevei Tzion. These are deeply religious Jews who were dedicated to rebuilding the land of Israel and rebuilding Jewish life in Israel in preparation for Moshiach. And the Vilna Gaon himself, even going back as late 18th century, he too wanted to come to the land of Israel. He wasn't able to, but his students came here with, again, it was with a messianic vision. And one can easily say, it's not easily, it's fact, you have to be blind not to say it, that really the Ramban, HaKodesh VaTorah, the great 13th century Rishon rabbi who came to the land of Israel, he came to Jerusalem. It was empty of Jews because the Crusaders had killed all the Jews in Jerusalem. He was offered to be the chief rabbi of Hebron, which was a strong, vibrant Jewish community. He turned it down. And it's the Ramban who built a Jewish life in Jerusalem with a messianic vision. And it is the Ramban who says in his commentary on it, in case you think this is waxing poetic, I encourage you to read his commentary on the Torah, which he wrote in Jerusalem, and on Sefer Bamidbar, on the book of Numbers, chapter 33, verse 53. Please read his commentary, where he says it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, a chayv, which means an obligatory mitzvah, not a voluntary mitzvah. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael. If he says not only that, it's in every generation that Jews have to liberate the land of Israel. In every generation, Jews must liberate the land of Israel. That's a part of our heritage. He says, it's really a Gemara. If let's say a man wants to move to the land of Israel and his wife doesn't want to, I'm probably going to start a fight in some family in Woodmere, New York. But if a man wants to move to Eretz Yisrael and his wife doesn't, he easily can give her a divorce. There's grounds for divorce, and he doesn't have to even pay a ksuba. Vice versa, if a woman wants to move, he doesn't want to. I probably shouldn't say that because I'm going to get all these feedback from this. The key is, so it's very important. It's not like the religious world was squarely behind this. And one of the great giants, Harav Kook of blessed memory, he didn't see the state emerge. He was like Moshe Rabbeinu, who didn't get to cross the Jordan. It was his disciples that did. So there were, of course, deeply religious Jews, great giants who envisioned the return of the Jews to the land, that were living in a messianic Shas Gula, time of redemption. But what is striking is, as we've discussed, is the vast bulk of the Jews who returned to the land of Israel to build the second temple, as we find in Ezra Nehemiah, were not religious. And the Navi goes out of its way to let us know that. In both Ezra and Nehemiah, we have problems of Jews who are not keeping Shabbos openly. And in case you think, well, that was a big problem. No, it wasn't. In Tanach, you would be very hard-pressed to find any time. I'm going to change that. You do have in the Torah a case, but if you go to the prophets and the writings, it would be very hard to find any case of a problem like in Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. They're not telling Jews you're not keeping Shabbos. It's very, very rare that such a thing should happen. This is weird. The problem is almost always problems of Bein Adam L'Chavero. But that's basically they're marrying non-Jewish women. These are we talked about this, the more than 42,000, 360 Jews who come to the land of Israel were not religious. And we are told in Tanakh that about what they did. And also, interestingly, just another point, that's something I thought about. I wonder if you thought about this. It's interesting. I want to bounce this off you. All right. It's very interesting that in the Midbar, so we have the generation that lived in the wilderness, and we have examples in the Torah of someone who violated the Sabbath publicly, right, put to death. And we have a case where Jews take non-Jewish women, right, in the Torah, right, also put to death. Now, that generation that was in the wilderness, after all, they saw the 10 plagues, they saw the Exodus, they saw the splitting of the sea, they saw the war with Amalek. So they were held to a standard that was just no parallel to it. So they were punished very, very severely, and we don't see any parallel to that in future generations. Is it an accident that is precisely the sins that we see in Ezra and Nehemiah, the public violating of Shabbos and taking non-Jewish women? So the key point is that the Jewish people come into the land of Israel, and then there's tremendous trauma and upheaval. They're largely not religious Jews. I would say that it varies a bit. I mean, Ben-Gurion was not a religious Jew, but he certainly knew Tanach. He definitely believed in God. None of them were atheists. But these were the people that they were joined by Mizrahi in 1906. So we are seeing today, or in our time now, this country is much more religious than it was 100 years ago. Much more, can't compare the two. But we're seeing very much what happened in the past is happening today. And we're seeing the events of the past happening today. So it's definitely, if someone comes to Eretz Yisrael, it's a mitzvah. The question is, so I need to explain to the viewer, there are two kinds of mitzvot, and I'll translate it. One is a voluntary mitzvah, and one is a mitzvah that's a chiyuv, which means it's an obligation. Let me explain what that means. So, as an example, is wearing tzitzis, wearing tzitzis on a four-cornered garment. So, in truth, both you and I are wearing not Jewish clothes. Really, our clothing this is European clothing they're wearing, and what's most striking is it does not have four corners on it. So, if we did not wear a four-cornered garment, we would not be obligated to wear fringes. In fact, there were some Jewish communities where people didn't wear tzitzis, religious communities, and only the rabbi of the shul would wear tzitzis. And it's actually a question, if somebody else wanted to wear tzitzis besides the Rav, was it an Indian of gaiva? Was it like bragging because you're wearing it? But this is what we're going with. It's a very intriguing topic. But the key is, now, as it turns out, every God-fearing man, even though I'm not you, but neither of us are obligated to wear a four-cornered garment. We don't have to. And then we have no obligation to wear tzitzis, but no God-fearing man would ever not wear tzitzis so that we can fulfill the mitzvah of putting on tzitzis today. No one would ever pass up on the mitzvah, although it really is voluntary. We're not obligated to wear tzitzis. There are many mitzvahs that are not obligatory. There's some that we don't do. There is a mitzvah to perform shechita, perform slaughtering. It's the mitzvah in the Torah. But I'm not obligated to go slaughter an animal. I'm not obligated to study the first 38 chapters of Yeridea and go, I'm not obligated to do it. If they do it, I am fulfilling mitzvah. That's one kind of mitzvah. So many religious Jews view, that would be the view of many groups. I don't have to say which is who. Many groups feel that coming to Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah, but you're not obligated to do it. It's like wearing tzitzis, or it's like performing shechita, or it's like if you build a house and the house has a balcony where people can walk, so then you have to put a railing, a balcony around it, if people could walk on the roof of your house, right? That's a mitzvah from the Torah. But I'm not obligated to put a balcony up there. So that's that kind of voluntary mitzvah. It's a mitzvah only if you create a circumstance which necessitates it. Got it? That's the voluntary mitzvah. But there's another mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that's a chiyuv, which means eating matzah on Pesach. On the first night of Pesach, it is a person can't say, I want to. You must eat matzah. A man must wear tefillin. It's not voluntary. So that's really the major disagreement between the two. there's no group that says, I don't know, maybe there's some odd group out there, but the Satmar Rebbe just came here to Israel and visited many of his followers who live here in Israel. I don't have a problem with that. I don't know why he and his brother still don't get along. I just had a conversation. I was walking to my home tonight, and I met a whole bunch of Satmar Hasidim, and we had a long, long conversation about this. Well, something that we talked about in the past. But anyway, so that's the real disagreement. Is it a voluntary mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael? Now, there's no question, once you live in Eretz Yisrael, there's so many mitzvahs that you can only keep here in the land of Israel that can be kept outside the land of Israel. And this is the reason why Moses of blessed memory, our teacher, he begged God to come into the land of Israel. Even though he could not lead the nation, as you recall, he still said, fine, Yeshua can lead. Moshe Rabbeinu did not want to be the Rebbe. Unlike other Rebbes, he was not interested in leading the nation. And he fought God for a week, saying, this is not for me. Finally, God convinced him. But he did not want to lead. And when God said, you can come into the land, he said, can I just go? Why did he want to go? The Gemara is, why did he want to go? He wanted to put his feet in the Kinneret. He wanted to go to the beach in Tel Aviv. He wasn't interested. Or rather, he wanted to fulfill all the mitzvahs that only could be fulfilled in the land of Israel. In fact, in one view, all the mitzvahs really are bound up in the land of Israel. And outside the land of Israel, the commandments that we keep are only to prepare us as a way of training. It's like a 9-year-old child is training for his bar mitzvah, so there's like chinuch almost. So that's really the disagreement that we see. But the Ramban is a giant, and his view is very strong. It's based on a Gemara that discusses that if a woman wants to move to Eretz Yisrael, her husband doesn't want to, he has to give her ksuba, means he has to pay her off, and she can demand a divorce. It's a very serious matter about coming to Eretz Yisrael. You talk about Rav Tachtel's work. That was the work I read when I was 16 years old that changed my life. An important point that I think the viewers must know is he was the head of the Beis Din in Satmar. That means he was fiercely anti-Zionist in Hungary. He was one of the greatest proponents of Jews not coming to Palestine and opposing the Zionist movement. This is what's very critical. Everything he wrote on the run. I don't know how he did it because he had nothing with him. He was in hiding. And he wrote Eim Habonim. The man was just a giant, and it's understandable why he would be one of the premier minds in Europe. And ultimately, he was killed, I believe, on a train that was on its way to Auschwitz. But everything he wrote, which is because all he's doing is bringing down sources. And he explains very carefully that here you had all these things. That means you had a movement of Jews coming to Eretz Yisrael. You had giants like you have Rav Kook and so on who's saying come to Eretz Yisrael. You had a declaration by the British Empire that designates the land of Israel for the people. And here, James Balfour, who was a foreign secretary, he was a Christian. He was a devout Christian. He was a dispensationalist Christian. These were not like I'm going to say this now, this may be provocative. I've never said this publicly. I'm just saying, I don't know this is correct. I'm just going to say, this is my observation. I don't think Trump really is a Christian. I have never heard, and please correct me, it's just something I've thought about for a few years. I've never heard Trump, unless he was speaking at a Christian event, or he spoke at Charlie Kirk's memorial, which basically in Arizona was like a church thing. The whole thing was just a big Christian thing. Unless it's at a Christian event, he invokes God all the time. He's a person who believes in God for sure. Whatever you can say about him, I never heard him say Jesus ever, except if he was at a Christian event with Christian pastors where it was sort of obligatory. In fact, I remember he once spoke at Liberty University, which is a big Christian university in the United States, fundamentalist Christian university. And he referred to a letter of Paul as 1 Corinthians, and it was in all the papers because no one says it that way. Because if you read the Roman numeral, so it looks like a number 1 Corinthians. But like anybody who has even the most superficial knowledge of the Christian Bible would know it's called 1 Corinthians. So I don't think. Now, if he's asked, he says he's a Christian. But there's been times where he was probed by people and going like, "Do you believe he died for your sins? Do you believe you're a sinner?" And he goes, "No." He is a real theist. He's a very unusual person, and Hashem uses very unusual circumstances, dafka, deliberately, when the geula, when a redemptive process is at work, whether it's how Jacob gains the firstborn, how it happened. It's always through the back door that David, a boy whose own father didn't think he was worthy of even bringing in front of Samuel. It always just goes through the oddest way in the world, and it did in the time we're living today. So I think you can break down those two views as mainstream. Now, the Neturei Karta is just a weirdo group. It should be said that that group has 2 sections, one that you never hear about, and they do not sit with terrorists, okay? But the one you all know about are considered insane. I'm just saying they're sovereign. No one likes. Everyone thinks they're out of their minds, but we all have crazy people, and they're it.
I wanted to go back to a few things. Number one, I was reading Kovetz Mamarim, which is the writings of Rabbi Hanan Wasserman, who was part of the movement in the early 1930s and 40s, there was question about the birth of Israel. It was because I really think that you've mentioned this many times, that we are somewhat history seems to repeat itself, and we're at this point. And he writes that the Mishnah at the end of Sota, we all sing a song. Anachnu maminim b'nei maminim. We are the children of people who believe in God, and that seems to be like a theme song of our generation. And actually, it's a Mishnah, and the Mishnah it's in the tractate of Sota, and it says that there'll be chutzpah yazin, there'll be a lot of audacity. Chutzpah is, everybody knows what chutzpah is, and then there'll be the face of the generation. It's talking about the generation that greets Moshiach, and it says they will have chutzpah, and they will be brazen, and they will be like a dog. Their face will be like a dog. They will be following trends, and then it ends off by saying we're going to be faithful. So he says in the name of Rav Chaim Volozhin, who was a great sage, that actually might be a curse, meaning that instead of actually taking action and doing something, people will be falling back on faith and saying, Hashem Yazar, God will take care of it, God will send the eagles, and Mashiach will come on a donkey, which I think you'd agree is a debate in the Gemara whether or not he'll come on a donkey. That's when we're not worthy, but he could come in other ways. One thing it does say is that he comes chamutz begadim, that when Mashiach comes, his garments are soiled. So maybe you could tell me, from a Torah perspective, maybe some ideas of what that means.
Right. So first of all, where do we find soiled garments in Tanach? What does that mean? What does that convey? So soiled garments are the garments. It's so beautiful, very powerful. This comes from one of the 8 ecstatic visions in the beginning of the book of Zechariah, where Yehoshua, now this Yehoshua is the nephew of Ezra. This Yehoshua, his father's name is Yehotzadok, and Yehotzadok was the younger brother of Ezra. Ezra did not come to the land of Israel in the first Aliyah. He wasn't part of that first wave. The reason was different. Ezra, who was the giant of Torah of the generation, was taking care of his Rebbe, Baruch ben Neriah, back in Bavel. So he didn't come immediately. He came a little later. Now, what's very striking about this chapter is Yehoshua, who is one of the 2 giants leaders. He and Zerubbabel are the 2 people that come to usher in the second temple, the rebuilding of the second temple. Yehoshua, of course, was a Kohen. Now, we're told that he's wearing filthy garments, Zechariah chapter 3. And he's brought before Sutton. Now, this vision, you can see why Rashi says Zechariah is hard to understand. So the vision goes like this. Sutton is accusing him. Why? Because he's wearing dirty clothes. And God rebukes Sutton and says, get away, go. And then he is told that these garments must be removed, and we put on new garments. This is the Kohen Gadol, and should put on the proper hat that the high priest would wear. What is going on? It's by the way, this is one of the rare cases in all of Tanach that we're introduced to Sutton. It's very rare that happens in Tanach. What is going on here? So it's strange, it ties into what we talked about earlier. Yeshua ben Yehoshua was a good man, and his venture was a very holy thing, coming to the land of Israel to rebuild a temple, and he was serving as the priest leader of the Jewish people. Zerubbabel was from the house of David, and he was his companion. Those were the two people that come. What did it mean he had dirty clothes? Put on him clean clothes. What is this talking about? The whole story is that he had a son. And here we have to go to Ezra chapter 10, verse 18. You have to cross-reference Zechariah 3 with Ezra 10:18. What's 10:18? I'm pretty sure that's the correct verse. So there we have a listing. Remember I mentioned earlier that when these Zionists came to land of Israel, the second temple, many of them married non-Jewish women. And we're told in Ezra who many of their names were. I believe the number is, I think it's 113 men. What's the story? Yehoshua ben Yehoshua, his son, he's the first one mentioned that marries a non-Jewish woman. Okay, and he's by name, the Mavayishim Barabim, and he's a Kohen, and he marries a non-Jewish girl. Ezra tells them get rid of the women and their kids, which they do. They do tshuva, and it's a very small punishment that they give them that to bring a korban. That's the end of it. But the key point is Sutton was using Yehoshua's blemish. What was his blemish? He didn't do anything. He was a very good man, but he had a son that married a non-Jew. And that was the begodim tzoyim, though that is the filthy clothing. And that's what Sutton used, as he's a prosecutor. I mean, Sutton is given a job. His job is to be, one of his jobs is to be an accuser, a seducer and accuser. But God said, get out. The key point is that we are told that Yeshua is not responsible for what his kid did. Now, Sutton had a point here, in a sense. If I was explaining his opinion is we have another story in the Bible, in Tanach, where a man who was a Kohen, whose son was doing terrible, terrible things. His kids were making a mess, and ultimately Eli pays a price for it. So the question is Yehoshua responsible for the people in his surrounding? And he's not. So that's what the begodim tzoyim means. That's what dirty clothes. Dirty clothes on me. I'm not the shirt, but it's the shirt I'm wearing. I mean, this is my environment. And therefore he says, put on new clothes. Therefore, Yeshua was not responsible for what his kid did. And he didn't overlook the other way. Now, other people on Tanakh are held accountable because they could have done more. There's a lot to say about this. Even Ezekiel felt he could have done more to save the generation. We don't go into it now. And therefore, although we had the Netziv was a great Zionist who understood exactly what was happening. That's the key message there. The key message is that only a few of you among this group that has returned from Babylon to the land of Israel were loyal. But in fact, that's all it takes. I can work with you. It's a marvelous vision and a marvelous prophecy. I want to just, if I may, just one other point that must be said, because I know we have discussed this topic of, well, this rabbi, you know, was a religious Zionist. This rabbi was not. This rabbi has this view and this. People might go like, "What's going on here? Like what? And is it just like who is my rabbi? And could one of them therefore has to be wrong, right?" I think this has to be in the subtext that people are wondering here. And there's a point that I must share with you that I always found intriguing. There are instances in Tanakh where very, very holy people, and in fact prophets, made mistakes. When they were asked questions, and they responded when they were not in a state of nevuah, not in a state of prophecy. It's a very important point. I give you many examples of this. 2 Samuel 7 would be one. Yeah. Now you have a case of Daniel. An open case of Daniel in Daniel chapter 9, where he conflated two prophecies in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 12, and 29, verse 10, which seems similar, speaking of 70 years. I'm not going into it now. The point is, Daniel conflated two passages, thinking that these two 70-year periods were the same. And this has to do with the redemption. This is very clear. In all cases about the house of David and the redemption of the return of the Jews to their land. That was so critical, okay? And the Navi, the Tanach, our sacred literature, records what these are the holiest people that ever lived, the greatest people ever lived. And they rendered what they thought was the case, or in the case of Daniel, he thought that instead of a 70-year exile, it would be a 490-year exile. He was petrified that the curse in Leviticus 26:18, where God says, "I'll multiply your sins 7 times if you don't repent," he thought that the Babylon exile can turn into a 490-year exile. It was a nightmare. I can't go into comment, but the point is he conflated two texts. He did it just like many holy people looked at things in the past and came to a conclusion, and they meant it l'shem shemayim. And the prophet, in the case of Daniel, the angel Gabriel came to explain to him what his mistake was. It's a very beautiful story, Daniel 9, incidentally. Daniel is praying to God, crying, like, what's happening? Darius the Mede is now king, and why aren't the Jews returning the land? And he's praying to God, and one of the most beautiful prayers in all of Tanakh. And God could have sent Gabriel immediately, but he said Gabriel says in the beginning of your prayers already, I was told to go to you. And Chazal tells us that God wanted to hear Daniel finish it. It was so gorgeous before he would get the answer. So the question, of course, is like, why does Tanakh record when a great person, in this case, the Nevi'im were the greatest human beings that ever lived, the greatest people that ever lived. Why does it record when they made a mistake, when they were viewing a predicament and they were not receiving prophecy, but they assessed it incorrectly because they are humans? The reason is very obvious. Why is it included in Tanakh? To understand that the greatest people, if they don't have nevuah, we have nevuah, and therefore we have to default back to Tanakh when examining these texts. And this was very much the view of the Netziv. This was very much the view. Try, if you can, I say this to the viewer, to distance yourself as much as possible by saying, well, I'm on this team or I'm on that team. We have to default back to Tanakh, and there is, unfortunately, a tragedy that this generation is the most literate generation. We have more Talmidei Chachamim in our generation than in any generation probably since time of Chizkiyahu. Don't dream for a moment that 150 years ago in Europe, there was so much literacy like today. It wasn't. There were great giants, but those were the the unique students that were great that were sent off to yeshiva to learn. Well, most people lived in peasant environments. Today, there's so much Torah going on, but there's a problem that we all recognize. That is, there's not enough study of the Nevi'im and the Ksuvim properly, and for this generation, which is the generation of the redemption, and we're living at a time, incidentally, where everybody across, we talked about the spectrum, like you asked me earlier, like what are the different views, right? Well, across the spectrum, everyone recognized that we are in a time, Shas Hagula. Rav Kamenetsky said that, everyone said this. So this is not an issue of disagreement. So it's very important is try to, if you can, look, when Tanach tells about people who were the greatest people, who were looking at a situation, they didn't have nevuah at that moment and misassessed it. There's not bad or good or they're better or Daniel's better than other people. That's not the case at all. It's just you have to have nevuah in order to assess a situation.
You've said many times that the Jews, like it says in Ezekiel 37, need to return to the land, and all 12 tribes will build the third temple together. And we need all parts of the tribes. So if that's what we need, does that have to happen before Moshiach comes? I mean, a lot of people today are waiting for a horn to be blown to come to Eretz Yisrael. I'm asking, do we all physically end up, by hook or crook, we end up here, and then we could discuss Moshiach and the Beis HaMikdash, or is Be'ito Yachishana, does it come quickly or slowly? What are we experiencing now after 7 million have returned?
Yeah, so you're quoting, I think, the end of Isaiah 60, very, very beautiful passage, in its time I will hasten it. So that's very critical, in that Mashiach must come when the Jews repent, Isaiah 59, verse 20. Isaiah 60 ends with, God says, in its time I will hasten it. The context is the Messianic age, because after all, repentance is something that the Jewish people must do, that Jacob must do voluntarily. And in a sense, God steps out of that, meaning God does not control our free will. But we have to return. But God can get a unique mayor in New York. That's the truth. The danger is, I'll tell you, like when Hitler, Yamach Shemayim, came to power in 1933, he actually made many innovations in Germany that improved the economy. When he came to power, the economy was a disaster. So the worst scenario is that he's successful, spiritually speaking. It means if Hitler would have come to power, and it wasn't his first shot at coming to power, when Hitler came to power, Yamach Shemayim, he was very successful because the German economy was shattered. And he was able to strengthen the economy. And he was able to then leverage his success into the tragedy. Of course, you have, I was going to say he invaded Austria. When he didn't invade, he walked into great parades like he was a rock star. They greeted him with open arms in Austria. Probably they'll never let me into the country again for saying that, but that's the reality of it. The Einschluss, a red flag. And incidentally, for those of you who have not read Ezra and Nehemiah, it's very easy to read. You can have no excuse to God why you didn't read it. Because it's
go to a Jewish bookstore and get an art scroll.
You get an art scroll, right? Get Ezra and Nehemiah art scroll, but you're really going to very easily understand it. It is not like reading the book of Ezekiel, which is a little difficult. It's not, not very. We were talking about Ezekiel, but Ezra and Nehemiah is really. But just ask the question: why? How does this relate to my generation? So Ezra and Nehemiah, one of the things is that it begins with Cyrus, fantastic, and then bang, it's a disaster, and then up and down, and it's just the way it is. That's just the nature of the game. I think we were talking about Yeah. So therefore, I want to right. So Isaiah 60 is telling us that God will hasten the redemption. Now, I'm bringing the Talmud here. If the generation does tshuva on its own and is a dor zakai, returns to God, but if God has to force it, which means it's a dor chayov, so then it'll happen in its time, which means at the end of when the calendar is up, and I think that's the reason, I don't think we ever discussed this, why Jacob and Daniel, who according to our tradition are the only two people in history who knew when the Messiah was going to come, were distressed it was a distressing moment when they began to talk about it, because they were probably seeing the Be'ito in its time rather than the Achishena, rather than the hastening.
On the yeshiva of Panovich in Bnei Brak, there it says over there, Behar Tzion Tia Pleta, and the story is that the Panovich Rav was by the Chafetz Chaim, and the Chafetz Chaim was talking to him about Vayechi, the last portion where Jacob does call his sons in, and he called him in, and he told them to go to Israel, and that Israel will be, and that was a nevuah, and he actually it was so powerful to him that Israel, or Har Tzion, the Mount Zion, will be your refuge, that he took those words, and to this day, on the largest yeshiva probably on the whole west coast of Israel, Panovich Yeshiva, that's what it says over there, and that was the prophecy that the Chafetz Chaim told the Panovich Rav.
For you, the viewer, we are having a conversation now that very rarely has happened in Jewish history. Really, it's at a very, very special level, and it's transparent that it's really only the generation who are viewing the redemption that really were able to now piece together these events. So I want to go back to Ezekiel 37, which you described. So Ezekiel 37 begins with the valley of dry bones. A vision where dead bodies, bones bleached out, rise up, and Ezekiel, it's very interesting. Ezekiel is asked by God, can these bones live? It's very strange. Can these bones live? Now, if you or I had a prophecy from God, and we knew it was from God, and we saw a valley of dried out, bleached bones, but God asked you or me, can these bones live? I think both of us, well, of course, you're God, you can do anything. I think it's like, but Ezekiel doesn't respond that way. He says, only you know. It's a very strange thing. He says, only you know. Why didn't he say, you're God, you can do anything, right? So it's interesting, if you study Jewish history, I can assure you that there's a lot of study of Jewish history here. One of the questions that everyone walks away when viewing the scope of our nation's remarkable history is, how do we ever survive? How do we ever make it? How is it possible? That's really the big question, is how, and therefore it is only by a miracle that the Jews are here, or else we should have been destroyed many, many times over. Historians and even geneticists describe the tiny bottlenecks where very few Jews survive, and we managed to. It's the Jew is a test. That's why we are the witness. We bear witness. Ezekiel, he sees Jewish history, and it's so shocking to him. And here, the temple is destroyed in his lifetime, but he sees in the vision of all the destruction. He can't even imagine how the people of Israel. He says, only you know God, which is unbelievable for a prophet to say. And of course, I want you to taste the flavor and understand there's not an extra word in this numinous prophecy. Ezekiel cannot imagine that the Jews could survive this all. That's how the book of Ezekiel begins, with the Maisim Merkava, the chariot. It's really that the Jews will be the presence of God travels with the nation of Israel, and that's how Ezekiel 48 ends. If you look at the last verse of Ezekiel, the whole book of Ezekiel, so you don't even know, you don't have to memorize anything. Just go to the last verse. It's that ultimately God's name, and the Shekhinah will return back to Eretz Yisrael. That's how it ends. It begins that way and it ends that way. It's really so gorgeous. It's just blow the mind away. Okay. This is a big theme in Ezekiel. And then we are told that as such as the people of Israel, the Jews will be restored. That's why we are the witness people. We bear testimony to God. The very survival of the Jews is a testimony to God, the God of Israel. And Isaiah 43, verse 10, Atem Eda, you are my witnesses. I mean, Atem Eda no Meshem Avdi Asher Bacharti. These are not my words. I assure you, the viewer, that I'm not some speaker, I'm not some poet, and I'm not. This is all in the text. Then Ezekiel is told, take 2 sticks, one write down for Yehuda and his companions, the other Ephraim, the 10 tribes, and this becomes one in your hands. And then we're told about Moshiach. It's very rare in Tanach. I know you, the viewer, might be surprised by this. It's very rare in Tanach that you find the mention of Moshiach. Very rare. Most of the prophecies about Moshiach, the vast majority of it, is about how the world has changed. But here we do have an example in 24 and 25 where Mashiach comes into view. He's not called Mashiach, he's called the Nasi, which means the prince of the Jewish people. He's called David, that he is restored by God, and the Jewish people will be keeping all the commandments and all the ordinances. That's very critical. And then in the last 4 verses, so now we're at verse 26, 27, 20, the last 3 verses, that's where the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the building of the temple comes in. And the temple will be built, and there'll be peace, and all the nations will know that I am Lord. I was just speaking to a fellow tonight, very interesting person I was speaking to tonight, and he asked me, how is the temple going to be built on the Temple Mount? Because after all, the Muslims have a Dome of the Rock, and they have Al-Aqsa right on the Har HaBayit. I explained to him that when the Moshiach comes, there will be only one faith in the world. Only one faith. Everyone's going to want the Beis HaMikdash on the Har HaBayit when Mashiach comes. And it's very intriguing, and I said this, the fellow is a Christian. And it's in fact the fellow who I'm going to debate Sunday. We had dinner tonight. Yeah, no. So it's a very sweet fellow. So he asked me, I'm saying it publicly, I don't think he would mind. But it's very important, very critical to understand that when Mashiach comes, the most important thing is that there will be only one faith in the world. Every knee will bow to him alone, and every will confess him alone, every tongue will praise him alone. There'll be no other religions in the world. All the peoples of the world will speak in a pure speech, and they'll only swear by the name of God, and they'll only bow to him. So there will be no controversy. And that's why it tells us it'll be a covenant of peace, and all the nations, it says, this is what it says. I don't want to put any words from me, God forbid. It says, then when the Beis HaMikdash, when the sanctuary be in your midst, then the nations will know that I am Lord. So those 2 things have to happen at the same time. And it's now obvious, transparent to us, that no one could do anything on the Temple Mount while there are different religions, because it would lead to a World War III. This can't be. It'll be complete peace, and everyone in the world will want that there should be a Beis HaMikdash built on the Har HaBayit, and there'll be no condemnations in the United Nations. The United Nations won't need the United Nations, because the nations will be really united, not like the fake United Nations on First Avenue, but there really will be a united of nations, as Zephaniah says, that all the nations will speak B'Sof Berurah. So you're absolutely correct, Rabbi. This is all interconnected by Ezekiel. Now, how much more? Tomorrow we'll see more, and tomorrow we'll see more, and we'll see how all these beautiful prophecies will all come together in a symphony of excitement. But in 1933, or in these times, people, of course, couldn't see everything. Now we're in a special zechus to be living at a time where we can see these prophecies and how they're leading up to it unfold. And I may say one other thing. it's also yes, well, how it happened. One of the interesting things we could see, because we are living in the time of the redemption, it's very transparent that all the prophecies that have been fulfilled happened in a very plain way, just based on the text. It's very obvious that there's nothing odd going on. The Jews return, they have a nation, they have an army, they go to actual war. It's a real threat. Iran actually throws nearly 300 missiles at Eretz Israel last year. So it's interesting that where we are, we're somewhere in this cycle of unfolding prophecy. It's very clear that what has happened is very literal of what it says. That means there's nothing Kabbalistic. I apologize for using that term, but there's nothing, it's not esoteric. The word esoteric means that it's knowledge that only a few people have and it's not accessible to everyone. It's very clear. There's nothing hidden here. It's very open and clear. And I want to say this to my brothers and sisters just to clear this all up for you, and maybe we can sort of clear up this conversation for everyone to give you peace in your life, because this could have been a show. This is like one of the most exciting shows I've ever done in my life. That to give you menucha, to give our viewers menucha, just as we see that until this point, all these prophecies have unfolded in a manner that is literal to what it says. It's like Rabbi Akiva looking at the Temple Mount and smiling. We can have a peace of mind that if all the prophecies that were supposed to happen have happened literally, and here we are, we can have that certainty and confidence that all the prophecies that have yet to be fulfilled, that are going to be fulfilled, and it's obviously happening immediately, you should rest your heart that they will happen literally in a very plain way, exactly the way the texts have. Now, you can be sure that when the Beis Hamikdash will be built, all the nations will love it and they'll want it, and we'll see it clearly, just because it's not, I want to say this to you, I say this to the view, it's not possible that the secrets of the redemption should only be reserved for 4 people that really understand it. Jettison that idea. It's very obvious that the geula, the redemption, should be accessible to everyone. So as we see that everything that has happened, of course, had tremendous trauma, the Jacob's trouble, terrible things have happened. If Rav Victor Miller of blessed memory didn't say it, I would never take it upon myself to say it. But he said, I was in his synagogue on Ocean Parkway when he said it. He said that we can see what happened in the past, that the Holocaust, that we should understand that was Jacob's trouble, that was the birth pangs of the Messiah, and we can look back on these terrible things and say with confidence that's what it was, and we should not hope there should be another one. Nothing like that's going to happen. We are assured by Amos, who ends his holy book in chapter 9 with saying that God's going to replant the Jewish people to the land and they'll never be uprooted again. Please read it for yourself, verse 14 and 15. So therefore, I say to you, my holy brothers and sisters, therefore we can move ahead with knowing this is a holy land, that God keeps his promise. He's not a liar. The same prophet says this, the same non-Jewish prophet, Bilam, says that God doesn't lie, the same one who prophesies Moshiach. In the same way, we can know with confidence all the other prophecies that have yet to take place will occur just the way the Navi, just the way the prophet says.
Genesis 32, it's the story of Jacob returning from Lavan. Now, these stories are not just for us to learn. I'm talking to the viewers, obviously. It's not for us to learn what they did, but it's actually these are also prophecies. And when Esav comes to Jacob, it's only once he's on his way to Eretz Yisrael. It's only once Jacob decides that he's leaving Lavan and he's coming to Israel. That's when Esav says, I'm going to come after you with 400 men, 400, whatever it was. There was a showdown. Now, we're at that stage. That's happening. As we came back to the land, the world became polarized, as I've heard you say many times. And there were many Jews who came to Israel who said, you know what? Forget the whole argument. Is it Yemosa Mashiach? Is it not Yemosa Mashiach? I'm going to come to Eretz Yisrael because I want to be here right now. This is the place where we've always dreamed of, and I can come. And this quiet minority has slowly grown into a lot of people who really don't have, they just said, I want to be here. I don't want, I forget it, whether you mentioned it's a mitzvah kiyumis or a mitzvah chiyuvis. Is it obligatory or is it not? So maybe your thoughts on that, and then lead us out with the prayer. Thank you so much.
I want to share this thought with you, if I may. What you said is very beautiful, very powerful. We see an unleashing of rage and anger after October 7th. I want to ask you a question. When I was a young boy in yeshiva, we both went to yeshiva, and we both were learning the Torah together, and specifically after the Jews are in the wilderness. It means they saw, I think you're going to know where I'm going with this. They saw the miracles that occurred over 11 months, the plagues. They crossed the sea that parted for them. They saw the war with Amalek. They saw miracles nonstop. When I was a kid, the thought that bugged me is, why were they complaining so much? I could not get that thought out of my mind. Does that make sense? Like, where were the cucumbers and where's the water? And they're complaining, like, what were you talking? Like, I thought to myself, when I was a youngster learning the Torah, and really into my adulthood, I thought to myself, if I would have been alive and seen all that, I would never have done that. Does that make sense to you? Or, okay. And no one ever says that. And it's like everyone sees, because I thought it was a naughty thought. I think I'm saying it now for the first time in my life. I think part of the reason why this was possible is they were living in a time there was so many miracles going on. They were so acclimated to the miracles that they weren't even aware of it. Just like, as an example, you and I got cancer today many times and got infections many times, but our bodies fight it off. Thank God Hashem made it, all kinds of systems in our body that fights off all these things, and it's a miracle what's going on, and all of us do. We're just like then. There were so many miracles going on that you become acclimated, and you're not thankful for it, and you notice these small dumb things, even though not seeing the picture of what's going on around you. And we are, I say this with caution, we are living in a time, something that you and I have talked about. If our great-great-grandparents would hear what's going on today, they would certainly go get me to Israel. You have to be very aware there's a danger in the time we're living in that we can become so used to, so acclimated to miracles that we ignore them, we don't notice them. And I think that's part of what was going on when the Jews had so many miracles going on. That people just took them for granted, because we would go, why are you asking for garlic? And we could have been in Egypt. What are you, an idiot? We're living in a time where there is a danger in that there's so many miracles going on that we might take our time for granted. So we have to be chas v'chalila. You understand what's going on? And I think this explains everything, plus the generation we're in. So I want to end with this. My dear brothers and sisters, my tefillah is that we never take any miracle for granted. Should know that every moment is a miracle here in Eretz Yisrael. A miracle. Come here to Eretz Yisrael. Persuade your husband, persuade your wife. And know there's a danger in built into the time, just like the generation of the Midbar. They were in danger because there were too many miracles. You just get acclimated. And understand, thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here in Eretz Yisrael. Thank you that He gave us Yerushalayim. We should see all the nations do tshuva. Thank Hashem every moment. Never hope for the garlic in Borough Park. Never hope for the cucumbers that are in Queens. Rather, hope to come to Eretz Yisrael, where you taka have the best life. In Eretz Yisrael, you have everything. So there's no excuse, Kinderlach. Don't make the mistake that the generation of the wilderness had, in that they got too used to the miracles, but rather appreciate every miracle. Thank you, Hashem, I didn't get cancer today. Thank you, Hashem, I didn't get infection today. You saved me today. Let's come home and let's witness the redemption quickly in our time.
Rabbi Tovia Singer, Chazak v'amatz, thank you so much for joining us. Shavua Tov, good Shabbos. Shalom.